The woman who would come to be known, in time, simply as Nora stood on the steps of the Harlan County Land Office on a Tuesday morning in October, holding a folded document that had ceased to mean anything the moment the clerk inside had stamped it void. She did not cry. She had decided, somewhere between the river road and the office door, that she would not do that here. Her chin was level in the way of a woman who has decided in advance not to fall apart. And she held the paper at her side with the same flat care you'd give a thing you intended to deal with properly once you were somewhere private. The street below her was doing what streets do when they have witnessed something. Men near the feed store had gone quiet. Two women on the opposite boardwalk had stopped walking and were speaking to each other in the low, close way that means the conversation is not really about what they are saying. A boy with a flour sack over his shoulder had simply stopped and was watching with the open curiosity of someone too young to pretend he wasn't. What had happened was not complicated. Her late husband, Thomas Voss, had signed the deed to their 40 acres over to his brother Clement 6 days before he died, and Clement had waited a respectful 3 weeks before filing it. The clerk had been apologetic in the practiced way of men who are sorry but not surprised. The land was Clement's. The house on it was Clement's. The garden she had put in by hand 2 autumns running was Clement's. She had until the end of the month. Nora Voss was 31 years old. She had come to Harlan County at 19 as a bride, had buried her husband at 30, and had spent the year between those 2 events learning the particular loneliness of a marriage that was not cruel enough to leave and not warm enough to sustain. Thomas had not been a bad man. He had been a distant one, and in the end that distance had included her in its scope. She had not known about the deed. She did not think he had meant it as a wound. She thought he had simply not thought of her at all, which was its own kind of answer. She had no family in the county. Her people were gone, a mother dead of fever when Nora was 11, a father who had followed her into the ground 2 years later, leaving her to the Caldwell Home for Girls in Morgantown, where she had learned to cook, to keep accounts, to dress wounds, and to be useful before she was noticed. She had been useful for a long time before Thomas Voss had noticed her, and she had been useful every day since. And now she was standing on the steps of the land office with a voided deed and the clothes she was wearing and a satchel back at the boarding house that held everything else she owned in the world. The satchel was brown leather, cracked at one corner, with a brass clasp that no longer closed all the way. She had carried it since Morgantown. It was the one object she had never set down for long. By the second autumn, people in Harlan County would stop calling the Aldrich place a house of grief. She did not know that yet. She was still on the steps. It was a man named Callum Aldrich who came out of the land office behind her, having finished his own business inside, and who stopped 2 steps below her on the way down because he had seen her face and had understood, in the way of a man who has read a room correctly his entire working life, that something had gone wrong in there. He was not a tall man, but he was a broad one, with the particular stillness of someone who does not move without reason. He was 37. He had been a physician in this county for 9 years, having come from a medical college in Philadelphia with a degree and a wife and a set of good instruments in a leather case, and having lost the wife to a fever in the 3rd year, which had left him with a son of 7 and a daughter of 4 and a practice that served a territory of some 40 square miles. His hands were clean. His coat was not new. He looked at Nora Voss on the steps of the land office, and he said nothing for a moment, because he was a man who did not speak before he had something to say. What he said was, "Is there someone I can send for?" It was not quite a question. The way you speak to someone you are trying not to startle. "No," she said. "Thank you." He looked at the document at her side. He did not ask about it. "I have a situation," he said. "If you're willing to hear it." She looked at him. She had seen him once before, at the Mercantile, though they had not spoken. She knew who he was the way everyone in a small county knows the doctor, not personally, but as a fact of the landscape. "I have 2 children and a practice, and I am not managing the house well. It is work. It pays a fair wage. There is a room." He said it plainly, without apology or ornament, the way you state terms. He was not offering charity. That was clear. He was stating a problem and a possible arrangement, and he was leaving the response entirely to her. Nora looked at the street. She looked at the voided deed. She thought about the boarding house and what the room cost and how long the money she had would last, which was not very long. She thought about the Caldwell home, which had taught her that dignity was a thing you kept by being indispensable, not by waiting to be chosen. "I can cook," she said. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I have some knowledge of nursing. I know, he said. Mrs. Tully at the Mercantile mentioned you dressed the Pharaoh boy's hand last spring when there was no one else available. She had not known anyone had noticed that. The room and a wage, she said. Yes. All right, she said. He nodded once, the way a man nods when a thing is settled and there is no reason to add to it. He told her the address, which she already knew. He said he would be there by 4 o'clock and she could come whenever she was ready. Then he went down the remaining steps and turned toward the livery, and Nora Voss stood on the steps of the land office in Harlan County with a voided deed and a cracked satchel and a place to go, which was more than she'd had 10 minutes ago. She went back to the boarding house and packed the satchel, which did not take long. She paid what she owed Mrs. Garfield at the desk. She walked to the Aldrich house on Sycamore Road with the satchel over her shoulder and arrived at 2:30, which was an hour and a half before he'd said he'd be there. Because she had nowhere else to be, and because she had learned long ago that arriving early was a form of respect for the work. The house was a 2-story frame house, white paint going gray in places, a good porch, a garden that had been let go since summer. The front door was unlocked. She went in. The kitchen was the first thing she assessed. It was not terrible. It was a kitchen that had been managed by someone who knew what they were doing and had then been managed by someone who did not, and the evidence of both eras was present. There was a good iron range. There was a larder with staples but no plan. There was a window over the basin that looked out onto the backyard and the tree line, and the light through it was the particular amber of late October afternoons, low and honest. The children came in from the yard at 3. The boy was 8, she revised her estimate, with his father's stillness and a wariness about his eyes that was not unfriendliness but was not welcome either. His name was James. The girl was 5, named Clara, and she came through the door at a run and stopped when she saw Nora at the range and stared with the absolute directness of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. "Are you the new housekeeper?" Clara said. "I am," Nora said. "What's your name?" "Nora." Clara considered this. "Our last one was Mrs. Beecham," she said. "She smelled like lavender." "I smell like whatever I've been cooking," Nora said, "which is currently cornbread and a chicken I found in the larder." James had not said anything. He set his school books on the table and sat down and opened one of them and began to read, or to appear to read, which was not quite the same thing. Nora did not push him. She had been an 8-year-old who did not trust new people, and she remembered what it felt like to be managed by them, and she had no intention of doing that to him. Callum Aldrich came home at 4:15. He came through the back door, which she had already understood was his habit, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and took in the supper on the range, and the children at the table, and Nora moving between the larder and the counter with the ease of someone who has been in a kitchen her whole life, which she had. He set his instrument case on the hall table. He washed his hands at the basin. "There's a patient I need to see after supper," he said. "Old Harker up on the ridge. His leg is not improving." "I can keep a plate warm," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said, and sat down at the table with his children. She served supper and did not sit with them because it was the first night, and she had not been invited, and she was not a woman who assumed. She ate standing at the counter after they had finished, looking out the window at the dark coming down through the trees, and she felt something she was careful not to name yet because it was too early and the ground was not proven, and she had learned the cost of naming things too soon. The weeks settled into shape the way weeks do when there is enough work to fill them. Nora learned the house and the house learned her. She learned which floorboards to step around in the dark, where the good lamp was kept, how much wood the range needed to hold heat through the night. She learned that James took his coffee, which he was not supposed to have but which his father had apparently stopped arguing about, with no sugar, and that Clara could be talked into eating almost anything if it was presented as something a specific person she admired had also eaten. She learned the practice. Callum Aldrich kept office hours in the front room on Monday and Wednesday mornings and made rounds the rest of the week, and on the days when a case was complicated or when a patient came in the night. He came home late and quiet, and she had learned by the second week to leave a lamp on in the kitchen and something warm on the back of the range. She did not wait up. She left the things and went to bed. He never mentioned it. She never mentioned it. The lamp burned and the food was there, and nothing was said about either, which was its own kind of conversation. She had some knowledge of nursing, as she had told him. More than some, in fact. The Caldwell home had been short of money and long on need, and the woman who ran it, a Mrs., Fern Aldgate had believed that useful girls were better than decorative ones and had taught accordingly. Nora could clean and pack a wound, could set a simple fracture with a splint and steady hands, could recognize the signs of fever going wrong, could mix a poultice that would not do harm and might do good. She had not said all of this to Callum on the steps of the land office because he had not asked and she had not wanted to oversell what she could not yet prove. She proved it on a Wednesday in November. He had a patient in the front room, a farmer named Delacroix who had taken a hay hook through the palm. The wound needed cleaning and closing, and it needed a second pair of hands, and his usual assistant, a boy named Fenn who helped with the practice, had not come in that morning. Callum came to the kitchen door with his sleeves already rolled. "I need someone to hold the lamp and hand me what I ask for," he said. "Can you do that without looking away?" "Yes," she said. She washed her hands. She went in. She held the lamp where he needed it and handed him what he asked for in the order he asked for it, and she did not look away. And when Delacroix made a sound that was not quite a scream and gripped the arm of the chair with his good hand, she put her free hand on his forearm and held it there, steady, until the worst of it was past. When it was over and Delacroix had been sent home with instructions and a cloth sling, Callum washed his instruments in silence. Nora cleaned the table. "You've done that before," he said. It was not a question. "Something like it," she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read, something that moved across his face and was set aside before it fully arrived. "Fenn is unreliable," he said. "If you're willing, I could use you in the room when the cases are complicated." "I'm willing," she said. She started supper. It became a regular arrangement, unhurried and practical. She assisted when he needed her and managed the house when he didn't. And the line between the two things began to blur in the way that lines do when the people on either side of them stop noticing the line. James had thawed by the third week, not dramatically but in the small increments that mean more than drama. He had begun to answer her questions with more than one word, and then to ask her questions in return. And then one evening he had brought his school book to the kitchen table where she was working, and read to himself in her company without being asked, which she understood was a significant thing and treated as ordinary. Clara had attached herself immediately, in the way of a 5-year-old who has decided a thing and sees no reason to be subtle about it. She followed Nora through the house in the mornings, handing her things that were not always the things she needed, asking questions about whatever was in front of them, with the relentless specificity of a child who wants to understand how everything works. Nora answered every question. She had found, over the years, that children who were answered honestly became children who asked good questions, and that this was worth more than quiet. There was a small cedar chest in the corner of the room they had given her, the kind that holds things people mean to return to. She had set her satchel on top of it the first night and had not unpacked more than she needed. She was not sure why she had not unpacked the rest. She told herself it was because the arrangement was temporary. She was not certain she believed herself. On a Friday in late November, she came downstairs before dawn to start the range and found that the loose step on the staircase, the third one from the bottom, which she had learned to step over, had been repaired. The board was new wood, still pale, set flush and solid. There were wood shavings on the step below it that had not been swept. She stood on the new step for a moment. Then she went and started the range. Nothing was said about the step. She said nothing about it either. The gossip arrived in December, which was perhaps later than it might have in a larger town, but was right on schedule for Harlan County. The source was a woman named Dora Hatch, who ran the millinery on the east end of Main Street, and who had a voice built for distance and a concern for other people's situations that she had prepared at home before bringing it out in public. Mrs. Hatch had been a friend of Thomas Voss's mother, which she treated as a form of authority over Thomas Voss's widow. The concern, as it circulated, was this: that a young widow of uncertain prospects had installed herself in the home of a widowed physician under the description of housekeeper, and that this arrangement was, at minimum, irregular, and at maximum, something that decent people would want to think about carefully. Nora heard it from Clara first, because Clara had heard it from a girl at school who had heard it from her mother, and Clara was not old enough to understand that this was the kind of thing adults were supposed to pretend they hadn't heard. "Effie Marsh said you are a woman of low character," Clara told her, matter-of-factly, over the breakfast dishes. "I told her she was wrong and that you make very good cornbread." "Thank you," Nora said. "What is low character?" Clara said. "It means someone who doesn't do what they said they would do," Nora said, which was one definition and the one she preferred. She did not tell Callum about this conversation. She did not need to. Word travels in a small town the way weather does, low and fast and ahead of itself. And he came home on a Thursday with the particular set to his jaw that meant he had heard something that had required him to decide not to respond to it immediately. He said nothing at supper. He said nothing after supper. He sat with the children while they did their schoolwork, and then he came to the kitchen where she was finishing the dishes, and he stood in the doorway for a moment. "I've heard what's being said," he said. "I know," she said. "I want you to know it has no bearing on this arrangement," he said. "None." She looked at him. "I know that too," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It isn't fair to you," he said. "The talk." "No," she said. "But I've had unfair before. I know what to do with it." He stood there a moment longer, as if there was something else he meant to say and had decided against it. Then he said goodnight and went upstairs, and she heard the floorboards settle under his weight, and she stood at the basin for a while looking at the dark window and the lamp flame reflected in it. And she was careful, again, not to name what she was feeling, because the ground was still being tested, and she was a woman who had learned to test ground before she stood on it. The thing that changed the town's understanding happened in January, on a morning when the cold had come down off the ridge in the night and frozen the road solid and turned the world to gray and white and the particular silence that deep cold makes. Clement Voss came to the Aldrich house. He came in the late morning, when Callum was on rounds and the children were at school, and he knocked on the front door with the confidence of a man who has decided in advance that he is in the right. He was Thomas's older brother, broad in the way of a man who had once been strong and was now simply large, with small eyes and a manner that was not quite threatening but wanted you to feel it might become so. He had, he said, come to discuss a matter of property, specifically a cedar chest that had been in the Voss household and which he believed had belonged to his mother and which he had reason to think Nora had taken when she left the farm. Nora looked at him from the doorway. The cedar chest in her room was hers. She had brought it from Morgantown when she married Thomas. She had the receipt from the furniture man in Morgantown folded in the satchel because she was a woman who kept receipts. She said, "I'll get the receipt." Nora tummed upstairs. She came back with the receipt. She handed it to him. He looked at it. He handed it back. His face did the thing faces do when a prepared argument has lost its foundation. "There's also the matter," he said, "of certain household items. I took nothing from that house that was not mine," she said. "If you have a specific item to name it." He did not name one. "I think we're finished," she said, and she held the door in a way that made the invitation to leave clear without requiring her to say it. He left. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment with the receipt in her hand, and something moved through her that was not triumph, exactly, but was in the neighborhood of it, the quiet satisfaction of a thing handled cleanly, without help, without raising her voice. She did not know that James had come home early from school with a headache and had been upstairs the whole time and had heard every word through the floor. James told his father that evening. He told it plainly, with the precision of a boy who has understood that accurate reporting matters. He said that Clement Voss had come to the house and tried to take something that was Nora's, and that Nora had had the receipt and had shown it to him, and he had left. Callum listened to this without expression. He looked at Nora across the supper table. She said, "It was handled." "I know," he said. "James told me." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. "He won't come back," she said. "No," Callum said, "he won't." He didn't say anything else about it. He passed the bread. But something had shifted in the room, the way temperature shifts before you can name the change. Something that had been held at a certain careful distance had moved, slightly, closer. She felt it and set it aside. He, she thought, felt it and set it aside. They were both, by this point, practiced at the setting aside. It was Clara who broke the surface of it, as Clara broke the surface of most things, because she was 5 years old and had not yet learned the value of surfaces. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in late January, one of those winter days that relents briefly and lets a thin, warm light through the clouds. And Nora had fallen asleep in the chair by the parlor window with a book in her lap, which she would not have done if she had been paying attention to herself, but she had been tired, and the light was warm, and the house was quiet, and she had simply gone under without meaning to. She woke to the sound of Clara's voice from somewhere nearby, and she came up out of sleep slowly, the way you do when you are warm and the room is safe. And for a moment she did not move, and she became aware that her head was resting against something solid and warm that was not the chair. Callum Aldridge was sitting in the chair beside hers, which were close together by the window, and she had, at some point in sleep, leaned sideways until her head was against his shoulder. He had not moved. He was reading. His book was open in his hands, and he was reading it, or had been, and when she lifted her head, he looked at her with an expression that was entirely still, the way water is still just before something breaks the surface. She straightened. She said nothing. He said nothing. Clara, who was sitting on the rug with her doll, looked up at them both and said, with the absolute simplicity of a child who has decided something is true and sees no reason to hedge, "I told Effie Marsh that Nora is our mama now." Nora held very still. Nora looked at Clara. Clara looked back at her with the patient confidence of someone who has stated a fact and is waiting for the room to catch up. James, who was at the table, had gone very still over his book. Nora said, carefully, "That was kind of you, Clara." Clara nodded, satisfied, and returned to her doll. Nora did not look at Callum. She picked up her book. She found her page. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the floor in long, pale bars, and the house was quiet around them, and she was aware of him beside her with a specificity she had not let herself be aware of before. And she understood, sitting there with her book open and her heart doing something she was not going to look at directly, that something had changed in the room that could not be unchanged. She started supper earlier than she needed to. Dora Hatch made her move in February at the meeting of the Harlan County Ladies' Aid Society, which Nora did not attend, but which several women who had come to trust Nora did attend, and which Callum Aldridge attended the aftermath of when he came to the Mercantile the following morning and found Mrs. Tully in a state of compressed fury behind the counter. What Mrs. Hatch had said in the meeting was that it was a shame and a concern that the Aldridge children were being raised by a woman whose character had not been established, whose history before Harlan County was unknown, and who had, according to certain sources, been turned out of her own home for reasons that were not entirely clear. She had said this with the particular tone of a woman who is not making accusations, only raising questions, which is a way of making accusations without accountability. What Mrs. Tully had said in response, and what 3 other women had said in various forms, was that Nora Voss had dressed wounds and sat up with sick children and kept a good house and never said a word against anyone, and that Dora Hatch's concern was arriving somewhat late given that she had not offered Nora Voss any assistance whatsoever in October when the woman was standing on the land office steps with a voided deed. The meeting had not ended well for Mrs. Hatch. She had left early. The minutes, Mrs. Tully reported, would not reflect the full texture of what had been said. Callum heard this and said very little, which was his way. He bought what he needed at the Mercantile and thanked Mrs. Tully and went out. He came home and found Nora in the kitchen and stood in the doorway in the way he had when something required saying. "I owe you an apology," he said. She turned from the range. "For what?" "For not having said something publicly before now," he said, "about your position here, about the nature of the arrangement. I let the talk go on because I thought it would stop on its own, and it didn't, and that was a failure of judgment on my part." She looked at him. "You don't owe me an apology for that," she said. "I think I do," he said. There was a silence. She turned back to the range and stirred what was in the pot and said, "What would you have said?" He was quiet for a moment. "The truth," he said, "that you are the most capable person in this house, including me, and that this county is lucky to have you, and that anyone who says otherwise is working from information they have decided in advance. But pipin chani when she had her kantua." "That's a generous thing to say," she said. "But be damned defendi," he said. "I'm not in the habit of generous things. But be fired munabta for injuspalding pia. But be panjam to hurt you." She wanoa, and she stood at the range and felt the warmth of it, the range and the other thing, and she was not as careful as she had been about not naming it, because some things change the moment you look at them straight, and she had been looking at this one straight for several weeks now, and there was no longer much point in pretending she wasn't. The confrontation with Clement Voss happened in March, in public, which was not Callum's choice, but was the nature of how it unfolded. Clement had been to see a lawyer in the county seat, and the lawyer had found, or claimed to find, a discrepancy in the deed filing that gave Clement grounds to assert that certain personal property belonging to the Voss household, including, specifically, a cedar chest of the type that had been in the family, had been removed without proper accounting, and that he intended to pursue the matter. He chose to raise this matter on a Saturday morning on the main street of Harlan, in front of the Mercantile, where a Saturday crowd was present, because Clement Voss was a man who understood that public pressure was a form of leverage, and that a woman alone was more likely to yield to it than a woman with witnesses. What he had not accounted for was that Callum Aldridge was there. Callum had come to the Mercantile with Nora and the children, which he had not done before in public, and which had not been discussed, but which had happened naturally. The way things that are already true become visible. He was at the counter inside when Clement stopped Nora on the boardwalk. James and Clara were beside her. Nora was calm. She was always calm in public, in the way of a woman who has decided in advance what her face will do, and her face was doing it now. She said, quietly, that she had already shown him the receipt in January, and that she had nothing further to discuss. Clement raised his voice, not shouting, but the kind of raised voice that is designed to draw attention, and it drew it, and the street began to do what the street had done in October, the watching and the stillness and the storing up. Callum came out of the Mercantile. He came out, and he stood beside Nora on the boardwalk, not in front of her, beside her, and he looked at Clement Voss for a moment with the expression of a man who has made a calculation and is comfortable with the result. He said, "Clement, this is finished." Clement looked at him. "This is between me and the widow," he said. "No," Callum said, "it isn't. The cedar chest is hers. She has the receipt. You've seen it. Whatever your lawyer has told you, I'll tell you plainly that this county has watched what you did to this woman in October, and it has been storing it up, and you will not find the sympathy here that you're counting on." He said it quietly. He was not performing for the street. He was stating facts in the same register he used to state medical facts, plain and without drama, and the plainness of it was what made the street go entirely still. Clement opened his mouth. "She is free to go where she chooses and keep what is hers," Callum said. "I am telling you that as a fact and as a warning. If there is a legal matter, my lawyer will address it. You will not address it on this street." Newsomdil, Isedam, Masajan Printines the Momi. Mrs. Tully was in the doorway of the Mercantile. Two men from the feed store had come around the corner and stopped. Dora Hatch was across the street and had gone entirely still in a way that suggested she was revising several things simultaneously. Clement Voss looked at the street. He looked at Callum. He looked at Nora, who was watching him with the level expression she had worn on the land office steps in October. The same expression, the same chin, the same patience. He left. He walked to his horse and he mounted and he rode out of town. And the street watched him go. And then the street went back to what it had been doing, but not quite the same way, because something had been witnessed and stored and would not be forgotten. Clara had been holding Nora's hand through all of it. She did not let go until they were back inside the Mercantile, and then she let go and went to look at the penny candy in the jar on the counter, because she was 5 and the world had righted itself and there was candy to consider. James said nothing, but he walked close to Nora on the way home, closer than he usually did, and when they reached the porch he held the door for her, which was something his father did, and which he had apparently decided was now something he did too. The evening after, the street was quiet in the house. A quiet that was full rather than empty, the kind that comes after something has been resolved and the air has not yet settled back to ordinary. The children went to bed. Nora washed the supper things. Callum sat at the kitchen table with his account book, which he was not really reading, and she was aware of him not reading it in the same way she had been aware of him beside her in the parlor chair in January. She dried the last dish and hung the cloth and turned. He closed the account book. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it plainly, because I don't have a better way." She waited. "I have been watching you for 4 months," he said. "I have watched you come into this house and make it into what it should have been for a long time. And I have watched you with my children, and I have watched you in the practice, and I have watched the way you handle yourself when things are difficult, which is with more grace than I manage most days." He paused. "I am not a man who says things before he is sure of them. I am sure of this." She stood at the counter and looked at him. "I'm asking you to stay," he said, "permanent, as my wife, if that's what you'd want. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm not asking you to say yes because of the house or the children or because the situation makes it practical. I'm asking because I want you here, specifically, and because I think you know by now what that means coming from me." He looked at his hands on the table and then back at her. "You can take all the time you need. There is no pressure in this." The kitchen was warm. The lamp on the table put its light across his face and across the grain of the wood and across the account book he had not been reading. Outside, the wind moved in the pine trees at the edge of the yard, a sound she had come to know as the sound of this house at night. She thought about October. She thought about the land office steps and the voided deed and the cracked satchel and the boy with the flour sack who had watched her with open curiosity. She thought about the third step from the bottom, pale new wood, set flush and solid. She thought about a lamp left burning and a plate kept warm and nothing said about either. She thought about Clara's voice in the parlor. "I told Effie Marsh that Nora is our mama now. Some things change the moment you look at them straight." "Yes," she said, "that's what I want." He looked at her for a moment, and something in his face that had been held carefully for a long time settled into a different arrangement, quieter and more permanent. "All right," he said. She sat down at the table. He opened the account book again, which neither of them needed, and she pulled the mending from the basket at the table's edge, which she also did not need, and they sat there in the lamplight while the wind moved in the pines and the house held its warmth around them. And it was the most ordinary evening she had spent in a long time, and it was exactly right. Spring came to Harlan County in the way it always did, reluctantly and then all at once, the cold giving way to mud and then to green, the tree line behind the house going from gray to the particular pale green of new leaves that does not last long and is worth watching for. By April, Nora Aldrich, she had taken the name quietly at the courthouse, with Mrs. Tully and James as witnesses and Clara in her good dress, had moved her things out of the small room, and the cedar chest had been moved to the corner of the room she shared with Callum, where it sat with its brass clasp finely repaired, because he had fixed it sometime in March without mentioning it, and she had not mentioned it either. The satchel was on the shelf in the wardrobe. She had unpacked it completely, which she had not done since Morgantown. The shelf was full. The garden she had started in November, in the beds along the south side of the house, was coming up. She had planted what the season allowed and planned the rest, and James had helped her turn the beds on a Saturday in March with a seriousness that suggested he had decided gardening was a worthwhile activity, which she suspected had less to do with the garden than with the opportunity to be useful beside her. Clara had informed her school that her mother was a doctor's assistant and could sew up a cut faster than anyone in the county, which was not entirely accurate but was not entirely wrong either, and which had elevated Nora's standing among the 5-year-olds of Harlan to a degree that Clara reported with satisfaction. Dora Hatch had stopped speaking about the Aldrich household, not apologized, not reversed publicly, simply stopped, which was as close to an apology as such people give, and Nora accepted it in the spirit in which it was offered, which was the spirit of someone who has decided the subject is closed. Clement Voss had not returned. His lawyer had found, upon further review, that the receipt for the cedar chest was unambiguous, and the matter had been dropped without fanfare. The town had watched all of this and stored it, and had come, in the way of towns, to a collective revised opinion that it held as if it had always held it. On a Thursday morning in April, Callum came in from rounds earlier than expected and found Nora in the garden with her hands in the dirt and Clara beside her, being shown how to plant seeds at the right depth, which Clara was doing with intense concentration. He stood at the garden's edge for a moment, watching. The light was the good light of mid-morning, clear and unhurried. The pine trees at the yard's edge were moving slightly in a warm wind. The house behind him was warm and ordered and full of the small evidence of a life that had been built carefully, one thing at a time, out of plain materials. He went inside. He put the kettle on. He set out 2 cups, which had become his habit, and waited for her to come in. She came in 10 minutes later, Clara behind her, both of them with dirt on their hands, and she washed at the basin and took the cup he had left on the counter and stood at the window looking out at the garden. And the light came through the glass and lay across her face and across the cup in her hands and across the room that was theirs. The house held its warmth, not waiting for anyone, not anymore. And that was the story of Nora and Callum Aldrich, a woman who arrived in Harlan County with a voided deed and a cracked satchel and found, in the end, that the things worth keeping were the ones no one could file a claim against. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.